The best place to hide the truth is in the pages of a book.
Maybe we should just read. Maybe we should just read.
Welcome to Hayes Reviews. Good evening, everybody. I hope you can hear me out there loud and clear. This is Nick, creator of Hayes Reviews, and I am back for another live stream. Very exciting. I've had a whole 3 weeks off, and I've missed you all very much. So first things first, I want to shout out everybody in the YouTube chat: Caravaggio, Alien Scientist, Gwen, LJ, Adam, and Frank Lennon. Good evening to you all, and I'm really very grateful to have you back and joining in this broadcast tonight. And then over on Rumble, we've got Heidi. And Heidi is a stalwart companion in the Hayes Reviews Telegram group chat and a really passionate supporter of the show. So I'm very glad to have you here as well, Heidi. I've missed you all. It's been a busy 3 weeks. I've been doing some behind the scenes stuff, but also just taking a break because it's kind of intense live streaming 3 times a week, as well as doing a full-time job and, you know, having a life, marriage, friends, family, hobbies, all these other sorts of things. But I'm very excited to be back tonight. The last book we did was quite a long one, and that's why I felt like I needed a little bit of a break before getting started with a new book. But we went into the Telegram group. I put out a poll, and the results came in. And so we are back tonight reading The Next Million Years by Charles Galton Darwin. So that is what we're going to be doing. I don't know how far into the book we're going to get. I haven't set a time limit. It's absolutely baking, roasting hot here in the UK at the minute. I've turned the fan off because the microphone was picking it up. I've closed the window because there's traffic outside. And so I'm just sitting in an oven, and hopefully my sweat doesn't cause the pages to stick together too much on this book. But we're going to move on and go forward and get into it and see what we can see. So let's get right into a little bit of a preamble. It's mainly just housekeeping, so nothing too exciting. But if I click this here and we go over here. So this first thing we've got is the Hayes Reviews, all my links. So it's allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. And here you can see ways to support the places where I stream. We're currently streaming on YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, and Entropy. And you can also find ways to connect with me. I have a Twixter account, Instagram account. I have a Telegram account where announcements and content gets pushed out to the people who follow and subscribe and sign up there. I've got some cryptocurrency wallets at the bottom. I don't know if anyone ever uses those, but they're there just in case you do feel like doing that. And so that's allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. Very handy place to just find stuff that I'm doing and where I'm at. So a few other things to get through. If you are interested in supporting the stream and want to exchange some value, if you're getting value from these book readings and explorations and these learning journeys that we're going on, then please consider sending me some of your spare change, your hard-earned fiat currency. I can always put it to good use by buying more books. PayPal is a good way to send a one-off donation. There's a Buy Me a Book. You can send one-off donation there too. I've recently, while I've been off, I've been working a little bit on trying to build out a sort of monthly subscription offer. And so I've made accounts on Patreon. And here there's a membership tier. At the minute, I'm not a huge fan of Patreon, so I haven't made lots of tiers and lots of detailed stuff on there. It's kind of a high price. But Patreon's been pretty cruel to a lot of creators and has booted them off and censored them. So I'm not a fan of the platform. So I'm not that eager on encouraging people to go over there and use it. But just in case there's anyone out there who wants to sign up and chuck me some money each month and set it and forget it type of deal, then feel free to do so. That is there and you can do that. And you will get an invite to the private Telegram group chat as a bonus. This one, Subscribe Star, I'm much more fond of. It's less draconian. It gives the creators a fairer and more generous share of the money that comes in. And so I spent a bit of time here to create lots of different tiers. And so you can get involved for as little as, it's like £1.80 in UK money a month. And in all of these tiers at the moment, the only thing you're going to get extra is an invitation to the private Telegram group chat. But I'm planning on in the future building out more videos and resources and live streams, generally on things that I can't just read in their entirety here on YouTube, Rumble, and Odyssey. So I'm building that out. But I've just made the accounts at the moment. And again, if you're interested in just a set it and forget it type of support mechanism, then that is where you can do that. And I'll be much appreciated. So if there's anybody new or tuning in for the first time for this book that we are just starting, please have a look at the YouTube channel, Hayes Reviews. This is where all the previous book readings are kept. I haven't transferred all these over to the Odyssey and the Rumble channels. I don't know if I ever will. It's a lot of work, but they are all here on YouTube. So you can go and have a look at the first 6 books that we've read. There's a H.G. Wells Open Conspiracy. There's The Romance of the Rothschilds from 1914. We got a Bertrand Russell book on there. The Fabian Freeway, last one we did. We also did The Story of the Rockefeller Foundation by Raymond Fosdick, which is going to play into and overlap to today's reading. We did Lusitania by Colin Simpson, and here is the playlist for The Next Million Years, which is the journey we're embarking upon tonight. But I just wanted to let people know that under that playlist tab is where you can find those all grouped together nice, and you can stick them on 1.5 speed and get through them. There's preambles and contextual information on a lot of these videos, so you'll get the contents of the book, but also some other sources and further explanation about the things that we learned from those books. So I've enjoyed doing this. I think it's quite a rewarding experience, and it's good to help people step away from the intense bombardment of quick-fire information that comes at us all day, every day, and step into something that is a little slower pace, a little more focused and deliberate, and will actually aid us in our ability to take in information and parse it and wade through it, rather than degrade our ability to focus and pay attention to things. I'm not trying to freak people out. I'm not trying to spread any fear porn or get anyone black-pilled. That's not what it's about, although we do look at some pretty sobering stuff. What it's about is empowering people through awareness and knowledge and information by looking at what's going on in the world as according to the people who are planning it, because they wrote all their plans down in books and they wrote all their predictions down in books. And that is the most overlooked resource of good information as far as I'm concerned. So that's the back catalogue there, where you can go and check out the work we've done so far on Hayes Reviews. And you might notice, the eagle-eyed among you, that we have 99 videos on the Hayes Reviews channel, which makes today's broadcast the 100th video to go on the Hayes Reviews channel. And because of that, I'm extremely excited and happy to be here. I'm glad you are as well. And we got Elizabeth Kendall just rolled into the chat too. So it's good to see you back again. Welcome. So the 99th video, the 100th video that we're putting out on the channel today, I wanted to talk about something that I'm intending on doing later this year. So we'll just pop back over to the big head cam. So I've been thinking about Hayes Reviews a lot, and this project is extremely fun and entertaining and invigorating for me. It's challenging to set up and do the tech, to get on the microphone, to create content which I hope is engaging, entertaining, and informative, and uplifting and empowering as well. I've had some good feedback and good invitations and good conversations with other people who are working in a similar sort of sphere on a similar sort of project as me. And what I've been thinking about is, what could Hayes Reviews become in the future? What could we do with it? How could we make it into something that'll best serve those people who are interested in this sort of thing? And so the idea that I've come up with, and what I want to do in the coming months, some point in the rest of the year, is to build a Hayes Reviews community. And so I wanted to talk about this on the 100th video before we get into the reading today, is that I'm going to be inviting people over the coming weeks and months as we go through this book and the other two that we have planned to read next, to get in touch and let me know if there's any interest or enthusiasm for a Hayes Reviews community. So the way I envisage it and the way I think about it, and I haven't given too much thought to it because a community has to grow organically, so you can't really be too prescriptive about what it's going to do, right? But the way I've thought about it, what would a Hayes Reviews community look like? First and foremost, it's going to be a community of book lovers, people who like to read, like to get books, voracious readers, book collectors, people who love hours in dusty secondhand bookshops searching for that little piece of treasure that you want to add to your collection. That's first and foremost going to be what it's about. But what can we do for each other as a community? And the idea that I came up with is that we can work together to help each other to build reading habits and hold each other accountable and give each other encouragement and tips on building and maintaining a reading habit. I think most people would agree, it's kind of like exercise and eating, eating healthily. Most people will say that they should exercise more and they should probably eat more healthily. And in the same way, I think most people would say would agree that they probably need to read more. It's one of those things that people don't really get cynical about. They might say it's boring. They might say it's not the thing that they enjoy, but not too many people are cynical about reading, because it's pretty much universally well known that is one of the most powerful ways to access knowledge and gain information about the world, particularly in this kind of hyper-normalized reality. Just let that motorbike go past. I'll have a sip while that's going on, shall I? Okay. Particularly in this hyper-normalized reality where we're just getting... it's very hard to parse what's factual, what's true, and what is just fluff and noise and propaganda and distraction and clickbait and all these other sort of things that we're swimming in, especially in the digital world. So I thought a return to books, people who are interested in books, people who want to maybe they don't have any reading habit at all and they want to build one, start one from scratch. This is a community where you can come in and get some encouragement and some guidance and some accountability on doing that. I also imagine it would be a community where people can share and exchange tips on what books to read. The thing that started me collecting books was that I couldn't believe some of the topics that were out there in some of these books that I'd never heard of. Things such as a paperclip conspiracy or the hidden history book about the origins of World War I. All sorts of things that are verifiable and true about our history that are not taught to us or mentioned in any other medium other than these dusty old books. And so having a community of people who can tell you, hey, do you know about this book? Or have you read that one? And being able to point you in that direction, I think would also be extremely valuable. The other functions I imagine it would also perform would be a place to not only read the books and know what books to read, but also to practice the learning and the retaining of the information in those books. Because it's all well and good to sit down and read a book, but if you don't remember and retain and aren't able to recall any of that information, then there's not a huge amount of benefit from the book, right? So I thought it would be a good place to practice note-taking and how to store and build out the information that you've read and how to read around a topic and get contextual information coming in and study skills, in other words, on how to make the most use of your reading ability that you are now building up and practicing and improving. Okay, so that's kind of the step. That was the step 2 that I thought of. Step 1, read more and help each other to read more and build up a better reading habit. Step 2, how do we learn and best make use of that information and retain it and put it together in a way that's useful and pick out the bits that are relevant and we need to remember. That's step 2. And then step 3, I envisage a forum where we can practice talking to and teaching each other about the things that we've read in the books. This seems like the logical third step. It's all well and good having the book, then you read it, and you've remembered the key bits and you've put it into some sort of system of knowledge that you have access to. But now you got to share it. Now you got to talk to other people and tell other people about it, right? Because knowledge only becomes wisdom when it's shared. And so those are the kind of 3 steps that I thought a Hayes Reviews community might be of service to people who's interested in any of that sort of thing. So I don't want to say much more than that, really. That's kind of as far as I've got with it, because from this part on, it has to be people who are interested, people who want to take part, people who want to be part of that organic community building process. So there is going to be a little reminder at the end of the broadcast today, just saying if that sounds good to you and you want to either get on the waiting list or you want to get in touch with me about how to get this going and build it out and get it started and up and running, then please shoot me an email. You've already got that by this point. And if you don't have it yet, you will get it at the end of the broadcast tonight as well. So that is my 100th video announcement. And I hope that sounds interesting to some people out there, because I'm certainly excited at the prospect of getting this thing up and running. And the goal is to get it done in some shape or form by the end of the year. So it's June now. We just passed the summer solstice. We're on the decline in terms of days shortening, heading back into the winter. We got to steel ourselves and prepare ourselves for the cold months, for the bad weather, for the challenging short days and long nights ahead. What better way to do that than finding and building community, accessing some camaraderie, and doing it around something as wonderful and precious as reading and books. That's what I think. And if you're into that, then shoot me a message or get in touch via my email address, and let's have a conversation. That would be excellent. Alrighty, back to the article. I say the article, it's just because I've called this screen the article cam. What else we got? Okay, so another thing that I did while I wasn't live streaming was I was invited to go and talk on the Occult Rejects show. And this gentleman on the left here is Nick, and I'm Nick at the bottom, and this is Headless Giant at the top right. We had a very interesting conversation about the Fabian Society, and I learned a lot. So anybody who wants to take their learning that we did on the previous book reading to another level, check that out. A really great show. They're working very hard. They're putting out so many videos, having fascinating conversations. I can't tune into all of these, but I just wanted to let people know that I'd done that as well. I also had the honor of being invited to take part in the Discordant Dragons episode. This was about 3 weeks ago now, or 2 weeks maybe. I can't believe how fast time goes, but this was with my very good friend, Mr. Newsfist, who's down there in the bottom right, you can see. And we were hosted by the excellent Yiz the Eunuch. And this was kind of a topical news story panel show. So we had 4 of us on the call plus Yiz. And we went through some news stories of the day, analyzed some articles, and gave our thoughts and opinions and ideas about different things that were going on in the news. And that was a really good time. And I wanted to let people know about that as well, because I enjoyed it very much. And I hope to collaborate more in the future with Yiz, with Newsfist, and with some of the other people who were on this call. Praise of Folly, he has some really good videos, particularly about one I shared in my Telegram chat, which was about nuclear weapons. What are they? What are they really? And I won't say much more than that, but he did an excellent video on that topic. So that's another thing that I wanted to let people know. I haven't been just kicking back and putting my feet up and relaxing. I have actually been fairly busy. Okay, so that brings us to today's topic and today's reading. Thanks for hanging in there through all that housekeeping with me. I appreciate it. But you only know the preamble rambles are going to get longer as we move through this book. But this book that we're getting on today is Charles Galton Darwin. So just before we do that, that's not what I wanted to do. This one. I put a survey up in the Telegram, and I asked people to choose between 3 books, and it was we had 40 votes, and it was the closest survey we've had yet. And in the end, what I decided was, let's just do all 3 of these books in the order that they came in on the survey. So what we're going to be doing, the next 3 books we're going to be doing, first one we're doing today is this, The Next Million Years, and we're going to be diving into that imminently. In second place, though, I don't know why I'm holding it up to the camera. I have a book cam. I'll do it. The second place is going to be The Fearful Master, which is the G. Edward Griffin book. And then the third book we're going to do after those 2 is The Milner-Fabian Conspiracy by Eoin Ratiu. So that should probably take us up to the end of the year pretty much. So it's laid out. We have a path ahead of us, and we are going to be very much learning, because these things, they all tie in, they all overlap, and they all help us understand why things are the way they are. So a lot of people might be frustrated and confused and flabbergasted about the events that are unfolding globally and the things that we learn about in the news. You're not going to understand those unless you understand the events that led up to the things that we're living through at the minute. And we're in an extremely important historical time. There is an unparalleled opportunity, given the technology that we have access to, given the information that we have access to, the ability to improve our own thinking and our critical thinking skills, our analysis skills. There's never been a better time in history to improve yourself and turn yourself into everything, capitalize on your potential, or at least start going after the fulfillment of your potential. And I really believe that. And I think the only way we can have enough motivation and focus to do that is to really understand what's going on, because that will light the fire under our backsides to make us realize that it's kind of a do or die situation out there at the minute. But we won't dwell too much on that, and let's get into today's topic. So the author of the book that we're looking at today, this is Charles Galton Darwin, and we've actually looked at this Wikipedia article before, and it popped up when we were going through the Rockefeller Foundation book by Raymond Fosdick, because in that Rockefeller book, we learned that the foundation funded the Galton Laboratory here in London, the UK. I'd never heard of the Galton Laboratory before, so I looked it up. And then it turned out that the Galton Laboratory was the country's sort of premier eugenics research facility. And this name Galton, it was named after Francis Galton, who, as you can imagine, if he set up an institute like that, what kind of person he was. And so that reminded me that I'd heard this other name. I'd heard this name Galton elsewhere before, in the title of this book, Charles Galton Darwin. And of course, we all know the name Darwin. And so what it turns out is that these families, the Darwins and the Galtons, they're very much of the type of people who think that they are going to manage the rest of us, and they're going to tell us where to go and what to do and how to live, and make decisions on our behalves about what we are free to do, what we are not free to do, what the rules are of our society, what we are allowed to have and who we are allowed to be with and associate with, and what our culture is going to be like, and what our religions are going to be like, and our worldviews are going to be like. These kind of very scummy, elitist, arrogant class of people, the types of people who sat down and founded the Fabian Society, which we learned about in the last book. They're kind of very similar, and they overlap. These families overlap. So the Francis Galton, he set up the Galton Laboratory, and at some point his family got involved with the Darwin family. Of course, this is Charles Darwin and his book, On the Origin of Species, or The Preservation of the Favored Races. And then somewhere along down the line, Charles Galton Darwin arrives, and it tells us here that he is the grandson of Charles Darwin. Now, interestingly, the thing we turned up last time we visited this page was a bit further down here in his in the section on his private life. We learned that his son, George Pember Darwin, married Angela Huxley, who was the great-granddaughter of Thomas Huxley, who was known as Darwin's bulldog. T.H. Thomas Henry Huxley was a huge advocate and proponent of the atheistic macro evolution worldview that space dust evolved into complex life over through random mutation over a long amount of time. So we've got three elite family names just in this one article. We've got the Huxleys, we've got the Galtons, and we got the Darwins. So that really gives you a clue as to how overlapping and tightly knit this class of people are. And then not only have we got those three, as you'll see, there was another one that popped up that stood out to me that I didn't really pay much attention to the first time we read through this, but let's go in here. So what I've highlighted is that he's a Sir and the grandson of Charles Darwin. In his early life, he was born the son of a mathematician. His mother was Lady Darwin of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. And his younger sister, Margaret, married Geoffrey Keynes, the brother of the economist John Maynard Keynes. Now, those of you who were with the channel as we went through the Fabian Freeway book will know that the discoveries that I had about John Maynard Keynes really blew my mind in that book, because I had no idea of his background and where he came from, and I knew that he designed the sort of economic system that we live in. But basically, this economic system, the key thing that he brought by designing his economic theory was deficit spending. So debt slavery for the majority of people. So not only have we got Darwin and Galton and Huxley down here, we've also got Keynes' brother being married into the same family that Charles Galton Darwin is from. So we learned that Charles Galton Darwin studied mathematics at Trinity College, Cambridge, graduated in 1910, and later promoted to MA by seniority. So we find this a lot in these kind of people. When we look at them, they get handed out awards and academic letters after their name, not really for doing anything. It doesn't say that he went and studied and here's the dissertation and the thesis that he put together and here's the grade that he got and here's the tutor that he studied under. He just got given an MA because, well, why not? Just give him one. But he does actually sound like he was a pretty smart cookie. He got a postgrad position at Victoria University of Manchester. He was working with Niels Bohr on the atomic theory, Rutherford's atomic theory. He developed X-ray diffraction, the dynamical theory of diffraction, and the mosaic crystal model. So it's pretty boffin type stuff here. On the outbreak of World War I, he was commissioned and sent to France as a censor, and a year later, William Lawrence Bragg had him transferred to the Royal Engineers to participate in the work on the localization of enemy artillery by sound ranging. So a very technical man, very logical, I would imagine, very interested in how things work, and mechanical machines and technology. So you could see already that he's probably going to be, and I haven't read this book, I don't know what's in the contents of this book, but he's probably going to be advocating some sort of, I don't know, one world government, technocratic, top-down control system, maybe. Just going out on a limb and suggesting that might be what the conclusion that he comes to. So for 3 years, he was lecturer and fellow of Christ College, Cambridge. He then worked at the California Institute of Technology, and then he became the first Tate Professor of Natural Philosophy at the University of Edinburgh. In 1936, he resigned his post in Edinburgh to become Master of Christ's College, and then became the Director of the National Physical Laboratory on the Approach of War in 1938. So very much in the academic realm, influencing students, probably very much involved in the design of curriculum and making sure that the students passing through those institutions were thoroughly and properly indoctrinated with a specific worldview. And my guess would be a very scientific, materialistic, atheistic type of worldview. Then we approach World War II, and it says that he spent much of the war years working on the Manhattan Project, coordinating the American, British, and Canadian efforts. If you were here for the story of the Rockefeller book, you will know that I think it was over half, it wasn't the vast majority, but it was certainly the majority of the people working on the Manhattan Project were the recipients of Rockefeller funding, whether that was through their scholarship fund or a grant or something to help them go study abroad or come to America to study. Rockefeller was putting money into the kind of people who ended up working on the Manhattan Project. That was a revelation that I had no idea about until we read it in that book. I remember being pretty gobsmacked when we dug up that little nugget. Darwin was then appointed KBE in 1942. Of course he was, given one of these, the most excellent order of the British Empire. So the private life we just covered, his his son married the granddaughter of Thomas Huxley. And then on his retirement, he turned his attention to issues of population, genetics, and eugenics. And just notice again, and I've said it many times, but just notice you see these words genetics and eugenics together a lot. Many people are under the impression that eugenics is gone. We got rid of it. It kind of flared up a little bit in Germany in the 1940s, but we stomped on it. Evil was defeated. Eugenics is gone forever. But actually what happened was it continued. It's alive and well. It is still practiced. It is still rolled out and used against the majority of the world's people on a daily basis. But it's not called eugenics anymore. It's been rebranded and it's now called genetics. Or at least genetics isn't exactly the same thing, but it's the evolution of what began as eugenics. And remember, like around this time, eugenics was considered, it was in vogue, it was popular, it was accepted, it was a smart thing to be into. If you were into it and you agreed with it, you were a bit of a clever cookie. And a lot of the people and the characters that we learned about in Fabian Freeway were open eugenicists and very comfortable with that movement and that line of study and inquiry. But back to Galton Darwin, his conclusions were pessimistic and entailed a resigned belief in an inevitable Malthusian catastrophe, as described in the book we are about to read today. He first argued in this book that voluntary birth control, or family planning, establishes a selective system that ensures its own failure. That was quite a revelatory quote to me. The cause is that people with the strongest instinct for wanting children will have the largest families, and they will hand on that instinct to their children, while those with weaker instincts will have smaller families and will hand on that instinct to their children. In the long run, society will consist mainly of people with the strongest instinct to reproduce, and this would ultimately have dysgenic effects. Excuse me while I have a sip. So that sounds like a thesis that we're going to be learning a lot more about as we move through this book. But I'd never thought of it before about this idea that voluntary birth control establishes a selective system that ensures its own failure. And that could be very much part of the reason why it is so massively promoted and pushed and accepted. And it is celebrated as healthcare, and it is, our young men and women are indoctrinated into it. It is made very easy. It is encouraged. It is promoted at every level pretty much now, primary schools upwards. Could that have anything to do? Could that be deliberate? Of course it could be. Of course this could be completely done on purpose, knowing that a lot of this ends up with a lot of this. So that is a little bit about the man who wrote the book we're reading today. Another thing that came out of this that I thought was quite curious, and I did look into, was his Marlborough College. So it says here he went to Marlborough College. I don't know where. It did say that somewhere because I clicked on it. And so I clicked here and I thought, okay, I hadn't heard of Marlborough College before. What's that? Well, it was founded in 1843. And it is one of the most expensive day schools in the UK. Well, that was back in 2015, 2016 it was. Not a hell of a lot of interesting stuff going on to read about Marlborough College, except for some of the people who went there. And if you go down, it tells you a little bit about the schools, it tells you about the masters. But the old Marlburians has had a few interesting points. So in the old so these are former pupils who went there. And the ones that stood out to me, one was art historian and Soviet spy, Anthony Blunt. Kind of weird that he is first and foremost described as an art historian. But art historian and Soviet spy Anthony Blunt went there. The comedian Jack Whitehall, yeah, that kind of smug so-called comedian in inverted commas, who's on our TVs all the time. Singers Nick Drake and Krista Berg. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Geoffrey Fisher. And then also Catherine, Princess of Wales, Pippa Middleton, Princess Eugenie of York, Oliver Grosvenor, Duchess of Westminster. So we've got the religious people, we've got the singers and the TV comedians altering the culture. We've got a Soviet spy going there. We've got members of the royal family all going there, the royalty. And we've got Ghislaine Maxwell, convicted human trafficker. So it's just interesting to see the kind of people who grew up together, who were educated together, the links between the different areas of society, the different strata within society. Quite curious that Ghislaine Maxwell would be going to the same school as all these members of the royal family, as a Soviet spy, and as these culture creators, and also the Archbishop of Canterbury, right? So very curious, and they're all going to the same place. And I'm pretty sure that this is where Charles Galton Darwin also went. Or I might be getting confused about why I opened... Oh, there it is. Darwin was educated at Marlborough College. I just forgot to highlight it. Yeah, so he went there as well. So this is the kind of people that this man was growing up and being educated alongside. Royalty, child traffickers, and also a massive amount of cricketers. So if you are into your cricket, check out, if you go to the list of, where is it? List of old Marlburians on Wikipedia. I went through all of these. Not a lot of these names jumped out. You got music, theatre, cinema, television, a lot of politicians, science and engineering. There he is, our man, Charles Galton Darwin. If you look at the sports, check out the amount of cricketers they got. Let's just do a Control F for cricketer. How do you spell it? I can't even spell cricketer. There we go. That's how many cricketers went to this place. That's a lot of cricketers, isn't it? So there you go. There's a little bit about Marlborough College. Infamous and famous for cricketers, child traffickers, royalty, bishops, and eugenicists. But maybe that word applies to all of them. I don't know. Okay. So that's it for our little preamble, intro, ramble this evening. I'm going to move my screens around and we're going to get ready to dive into the book itself. So I hope that was useful or interesting on some level. Quick check of the chats. Heidi was saying in Rumble chat, reading The Great Reset. Does that mean you are reading The Great Reset by Klaus Schwab? Or reading is the Great Reset? Or we can fight the Great Reset by reading, perhaps. And then Heidi says, knowledge only becomes wisdom when it's shared. And a little fire emoji. Yeah, I like that one. I don't know where I got it from. Probably Richard Grove. I definitely stole it from somewhere. But it's true, isn't it? You could stock up on all the knowledge and the information and the insight. But unless you're sharing it with other people, what's the point? You're just sort of doing something that's self-serving. You want to be of service and help other people to see these things and be aware of them and avoid them, particularly when these are kind of worldviews that are weaponized and really pointed at our lives, not only our lives, but the lives of our children and grandchildren. Like that's what's at stake here. And a lot of people don't realize is that what's at stake is, complete digital enslavement of future generations of people. So it's quite a high stakes thing. not being doom and gloom about it, but it's kind of a big deal, All right, we got Hasdak in the chat. Good evening. Good to see you back as well. I'm very happy to have you here. And Jeanette Lilly is back as well. Hi, everybody, she says. Hello to you. Okay, so I think we're about ready to get into tonight's book, tonight's reading. So let's do that. So we'll pop over to the book cam. And here we can go. And you'll see tonight at the bottom, we are running a little... we've got a little charity event going on, trying to raise a bit of money. There's a lot of lonely books out there sitting on shelves. They don't have a loving home. And I want you to help me rescue those books and give them a loving home and a happy place to live where they will be looked after and cared for and protected as they deserve to be, as books only should be, you know. So let me know if that's something you're interested in. You know where to go and where to click, and I would appreciate it very much. All right, the next million years. So this book is 1953 publication, and this is a first edition, and it didn't cost too much, actually. I was quite surprised. It didn't break the bank. It's not sort of one of those occulted rare books that's really hard to track down. I thought the price for it was pretty fair for a book that's nearly 100 years old. Well, 70 years old. But we got this quote on the back, so we'll go through that first. For the next million years, we shall be concerned with a history governed by the same human nature as we know now, with all its virtues and faults. There will, it is true, be small, slow changes in human nature as time goes on, but it is only at the end of 1,000,000 years that it may be expected to have so changed that future prediction about it would become impossible. Charles Galton Darwin. So he's saying that we can predict the next 1,000,000 years based on what we know of human virtues and faults. And I think the first thing that pops to my mind when I read that quote is Mark Passio's idea or assertion or argument, or he would probably say the fact that the people running the show here in this place are masters of psychology. They know group psychology. They know individual psychology. They know how to drive human behavior, what levers to push, what buttons to press, what temptations and rewards to give, and what to withhold, when to administer punishment, when to administer praise. Really just how to press all the buttons to get people to behave in a certain way, to get them to do what they want. That is the master knowledge that is used against people, and it's used on the level of the group and the society, and it's used on the level of the individual as well. So it's incredibly powerful and interesting that he's saying that basically it's the same human nature as we know now, therefore we can predict what's going to happen. Because the small, slow changes in human nature as time goes on won't really amount to much. So that's quite interesting. I would have thought he might be predicting a more rapid change, more severe alterations to our societies, to our cultures, to our ways of life, like a lot of these planners and insiders seem to predict and know is going to happen ahead of time. But it sounds like he's being a little more conservative with his prediction, at least judging by the quote on the back. So we've got the front cover, and we have this, I'll zoom in for you. We've got this kind of, it's a sort of a fishy thing wrapped around an anchor with a D at the top. And I don't know, I guess that D is for Darwin. But an interesting image. It's an anchor, something that weighs you down, stops you moving, something that holds you in place. Maybe it's meant to be a guiding document or prediction or plan that everything else is to be sort of connected to and kept in place by, right? I don't know. That's just me spinning ideas on the topic of anchor. Okay, inside flap. The next 1,000,000 years, Charles Galton Darwin. Quote, "It is possible now, with existing knowledge, to make a good forecast of the future of the human race." According to Sir Charles Darwin, we are living in, or perhaps at the end of, a golden age, which may well prove to have been the greatest golden age of all time. Never before in the world's history have so many millions of people known the blessings of civilization, and never before has the margin of starvation been so small. What is more, things probably won't get much better. No new continents remain to be discovered and exploited, yet the population of the world will continue to multiply until it is checked and reduced by famine. The economic expansion of the last 2 centuries has made us forget the inevitable struggle for existence, but when the present golden age ends, we must return to a less prosperous way of life. What will life be like in this grave new world? What sort of people are most likely to survive in it? In this stimulating and reasonable book, Sir Charles makes his predictions. Logical and inescapable as they seem, they will probably shock most readers. All the noisy motorbikes are out tonight in my hometown. But they provide a generous helping of that greatest of all weapons against starvation, food for thought. I'm not sure that is the greatest weapon against starvation. Actual food. I remember reading this before, actually, though, and I really liked that phrase, grave new world. I thought that stood out to me as, not that I like it, it's quite terrifying and scary and ominous, but I think it's clever, sort of clever wordplay. Sir Charles Galton Darwin is the distinguished offspring of one of England's foremost scientific families. His grandfather was the author of The Origin of Species. His godfather was Sir Francis Galton, the celebrated eugenicist. Celebrated by who? And among whom? So that's the connection. That's why Galton has the name Galton. That's his godfather. So very close links between the Darwin family and the Galton family. Among his other close relations are the Huxleys, the Keyneses, and the Barlows. He himself is one of the world's leading physicists, a pioneer in nuclear studies, and a frequent lecturer in American universities. All right, so there you are. Doesn't say who this was written by, but somebody at the Doubleday and Company publishers, I guess, put that together. And anonymous, gutted, late to the party as usual, rewind it is. We're only just getting into the book, so all you missed was me, the housekeeping. So you could, if you want to read the book, let's face it, it's the main event is the book, isn't it? You could jump right in now. All right, let's get into the book. I will remove the shill banners and we can focus. The Next Million Years by Charles Galton Darwin, 1953. And you see on this side here, we've got a Library of Congress catalog card number, and it's first published in 1953 in the United States. And this is the first edition, the first US edition. Preface. When anyone starts to write on a subject at which he has not hitherto worked professionally, his proper procedure should be to set out on a long course of reading with careful preparatory annotations of all he has read. Such a course on a tremendous subject like the present one might easily take 10 years. At the time when I determined to write this essay, I was already over 61, and it is safe to say that it would never have been written if I had adopted this policy. Since I very much wanted to write it, the only alternative seemed to be to give up the idea of elaborate preparatory reading and to make use from memory of a very considerable amount of unsystematic reading and thinking on the subject. A book written in this way can of course make no claim to the sort of authority that might be given to one which was based on exhaustive preliminary studies. I fear that the absence of references will give some inconvenience to my readers. I might be able to quote some of the references, but many of them I could not, and some of these among the most important, so that justice would not be done to the subject by only citing the sources I could recall accurately. In the same way, I have gathered a good many of my ideas from conversations and discussions, in only some of which could I name my informants. Well, that's pretty telling. He says, I gathered a good many of my ideas from conversations and discussions. And remember the kind of people, the kind of school he went to, the kind of people he's mixing with, Huxleys, Darwins, Galtons. Sorry, he is a Darwin. But it's interesting that he says, in only some of which I could name my informants. Now, is that because his memory's failing him at 61? He can't remember who it was that said a certain thing? Or is it because they wouldn't want their names to be published in a book and publicly put against the thing they said? Could be read either way. So that there again, it is juster to name none of them. All right, so because he can't name all of the sources and the people who he talked to and got these ideas from, therefore it's better to name none of them. Right, okay. In view of these doubts about the sources of my knowledge, it would not be proper for me to claim any originality in the views I express. I believe that some of them are original, but even with regard to these, I shall not be at all surprised if it turns out that I have been anticipated. Okay, hang on. Let me reread that bit. I believe that some of them are original, but even with regard to these, I shall not be at all surprised if it turns out that I have been anticipated. Okay, so he's saying some of his thoughts are original, but they probably are not. Even though he believes some of them are original, if it turns out they're not, it wouldn't surprise him. So he doesn't think he's coming up with new ideas here. It's kind of there's nothing new under the sun sort of message he's saying. Good evening, LJ. I have realized to the full the dangers to which I am exposing myself in foregoing the elaborate preliminary studies which the subject demands. But from my experience in other subjects, I am encouraged to think that little harm will be done by it. The spirit of criticism is much commoner in the world than the spirit of invention. I'm just going to move my mic. And progress has often been delayed by authors who have refused to publish their conclusions until they could feel they had reached a pitch of certainty that was in fact unattainable. Progress in knowledge is more rapidly made by taking the chance of a certain number of errors, since both friends and enemies are only too pleased to exert their critical faculties in pointing out the errors, so they are soon corrected, and little harm is done. Nevertheless, I have taken all possible precautions so as not to make mistakes. I have tried to avoid errors both of principle and in the examples which I cite, by getting comments from various friends who are well versed in the different branches of the subject, and I have certainly been saved from a good many errors in this way. Lest they should be thought responsible for opinions they may not share, I will preserve their anonymity, but I would take this opportunity to thank them for the great help they have given me. In composing the essay, I have had the difficult task of deciding the degree of knowledge that I might assume in my readers. It has seemed to me wise to err, if anything, on the side of explaining too much rather than too little, and I had therefore better apologize in advance if some readers consider I have wasted their time by explaining in too much detail things with which they were already familiar. So that is quite a dry and boring preface. Basically wants to tell us that he will not be naming his sources and he will not be telling us where he got his ideas and his information from. And that is curious because usually, especially with him being so scientific and logical and rational, although I remember hearing Tony Myers on the Grand Theft World podcast say that citing your sources historically is a relatively new practice. The reason being that anyone who wrote books in the past would assume that all the people who would read them would also have read the same books. And I think it's only in the modern era where we're inundated with massive amounts of published material at all different levels that it becomes important to then mark your paper trail and say where you read a certain thing or got a certain idea, right? So it's curious, though, that like Frank, you just said, not naming names, that's a good start. It's curious that he doesn't want to name names, so he obviously has a sense that the ideas may be controversial, may be unpopular, that he may be revealing something that the people he talks to and works among don't want revealed. It's kind of a few different ways to read it, but quite interesting and curious nevertheless. And so, contents. It's a pretty short book. We only got like 209 pages to get through. So we'll probably get through this in the next 3 weeks or so. We've got introduction, population, the 4 revolutions, material conditions, the species Homo sapiens, creeds, man, a wild animal. So that's telling us a lot about this worldview and what he's going to be pushing on us right there. the equating of man to an animal or the lowering of man's status to that of an animal is a really key part in the worldview that the controllers, the parasites, the cowardly, degenerate enemies of humanity, they want to lower us, they want to brutalize us, they want to bring us down to the state of brutes, so we don't see that spark of the divine in each other, and we don't cherish and recognize that creative energy that we've been given and endowed with by our creator, right? So, man, a wild animal. Limitation of population is chapter 8. Then we have the pursuit of happiness. Then we've got chapter 10 as multiple sections, and that is the history, and it's divided into population, golden ages, science, economics, politics, and civilization. And then lastly, there's an epilogue. So let's get in. This is chapter 1, introduction. Anyone who attempts to predict the history of the next 10 years is a rash man. And if he attempts to make his forecast for a century, he is very properly regarded as so foolhardy as not to be worth listening to at all. Nevertheless, I am proposing here to do what may appear at first sight a very much wilder thing still. I maintain that with our present knowledge of the world and of the things in it, though we cannot at all see the detail, we can foresee the general course its history is almost certain to take over a long period. It is certainly not possible to predict anything like a detailed history of the world, but nevertheless it is now possible to foresee a good deal of what I may call its average history. I do not know whether the true historian will admit that this has any claim to the title of history. Certainly it could make no claim whatever to be a narrative of events. Its aim is far more modest. It is to describe roughly the kind of things that will be going on most of the time in most places. Very modest. In one respect, it might appear that the prophet of the next 1,000,000 years had a very easy task. With the great differences of conditions over the different regions of the earth, it is almost inevitable that there must be a great deal of variety in modes of life. In the vast period of 1,000,000 years, and over the great expanse of the earth, there must be an enormous variety in the happenings. And it may well be so great that, no matter what the prophet foretells, his prophecy will be verified at some place and time. To succeed in prediction in this sort of way would not content me. It would be no better than the prophecies of the fortune teller, who makes a long list of mutually contradictory statements in the confidence that some, at least, of them are bound to be verified. My aim, on the other hand, is to form an estimate of the normal and not the exceptional course of the life of mankind on earth, to describe what will be happening most of the time. It is definitely concerned with the less exciting parts of history, the parts over which the historian's narrative often passes most lightly, because these parts include none of the stirring events which make up the great crises of history. I need not say that I recognize that this is an exceedingly ambitious program. Probably most readers will start by regarding it as so over-ambitious that it is doomed to failure. My justification for attempting it is that it does appear to me that in the course of the past century, and in particular of quite recent years, there have been such enormous accretions to almost every branch of knowledge that now as never before an essay like this has become possible. There have been very great historians in past eras, perhaps greater than any we have now, but they simply did not possess the material to accomplish anything of the kind. I have, of course, no claim whatever to pose as a historian, and it is through my other studies that I have been drawn to this attempt at a synthesis of the various branches of accumulating knowledge in the form of a forecast of future history. I have always had a great interest in history and in the biological sciences. but the final stimulus came from my studies in the physical sciences. It is these that provide the real reason for expecting that something like the present essay may be worth attempting. It may well be that some of my deductions will be corrected by those who have a deeper knowledge of the various subjects than any I can claim. I shall naturally be disappointed if my conclusions have to be corrected or amended in whole or in part, but even if it should be so, I hope I shall have persuaded some readers that the method itself is right. That is to say, that it is possible now, with existing knowledge, to make a good forecast of the future fate of the human race. So, what it sounds to me like, where he's saying to make a forecast, I think what we should read is to plan and have reasonable confidence in our ability to control the future fate of the human race. That's kind of how I'm reading it. The reason I'm reading it like that, and the reason this book got onto my radar in the first place, and I should say, is down to the late great Alan Watt and his work on cuttingthroughthematrix.com. And he mentions this book many times as an insider's revelation of what the plan is and what's going to happen. And so I always thought it would be a really good one to read because as it was written in the 50s, we could see if there's predictions in here which have happened over the last 70 years. So that's why I always wanted to get a copy of it and look into it, because Alan didn't quote word for word from the book, but he talked about some of the ideas and the revelations in it. And so that's why I'm not taking his words at face value, and I'm sort of projecting onto it what I think he's really saying here and doing a little bit of reading between the lines. But I'm happy to be corrected if people kind of disagree and think I'm off the mark, but that's kind of how I'm reading it. I think he's saying with the existing knowledge, we can now plan and be reasonably sure that we can control the future fate of the human race. That's kind of what I think he's saying. Let's carry on. To justify the principle that we can know what I have called the average history of humanity, I must make a short incursion into physical science. Perhaps I had better begin by reassuring the reader that I shall only need to explain a few generalities, and that no one need fear that there will be much further reference to the subject after the next 3 or 4 paragraphs. There are 2 quite different ways in which inferences, and in particular predictions, are made in physics, and the contrast between them must be made clear. The older method is the ordinary process of cause and effect. As an example, Newton enunciated the law of universal gravitation, in obedience to which not only the apple falls to earth, but also the moon goes round the earth and the earth round the sun. And I hope any flat earthers out there are not getting too triggered. This principle enables the astronomer to predict exactly where any planet will appear in the sky at any given future date. And people have been able to do this for a long time. Crow 777 does good work talking about a guy, I think he's called Tycho Brahe. So it's been, that information, that knowledge has been kind of occulted from us and then brought out again as like new discoveries and things that we've only just figured out how to do. But I mean, just look at, for example, Graham Hancock's work on the pyramids and the encoding into the structure of the pyramids of the precession of the equinoxes, which is on a sort of 10,600 year cycle, something like that. I'm not saying I believe everything that Graham Hancock says and does and all his work, but I was pretty convinced by this encoding into the sphinxes and the Great Pyramids. Sorry, not the sphinxes, the pyramids, of these sort of celestial patterns and this sort of clockwork type mechanism of the skies above us, right? So yeah, just a little side note there. Or again, take the design of a complicated instrument, such as a television set. The designer arranges his electric circuits and his electronic valves in such a way that, if a specified electromagnetic signal reaches the antenna, then calculable currents will flow in all the circuits, and these will give rise to calculable streams of electrons in the television tube, which in turn will give a calculable visual image. In this general type of case, a definite cause produces a definite effect, and if the effect is not always exactly predictable, that is only because the calculations may be so intricate that the evaluation of the results is not practicable. So he's saying here that you've got to hack into the mechanisms of cause and effect in order to predict what's going to happen, or in other words, in order to control the future. So you need to know, and this is where the in-depth knowledge of human psychology comes in with regards to the parasitic coward class and their ability to stay in control over hundreds and thousands of years by wielding that knowledge and maintaining a knowledge differential against the average Joe and Jane in the street, who never really get the opportunity to amass that knowledge because it requires an immense amount of study of books that are hidden and hard to find and occulted, and good luck putting your life on hold in order to acquire all that knowledge so that you can be wise to it and not be manipulated by it. Where do we get to here, right? By those who have not followed recent developments in science, this relation of cause and effect is regarded as the only way by which things can be predicted. For them, scientific progress means the discovery of yet more exact effects produced by exact causes, and they conceive that the cause and effect relation is the sole idea in what is popularly, if vaguely, called the scientific method. This would indeed have been broadly true of all the earlier stages of scientific progress and of all the earlier scientific laws that were discovered, but a very different new type of procedure began to emerge some 80 years ago, which has assumed almost dominating importance in recent times. This newer type of reasoning is connected with the principle of probability, and it is unfortunately true that there are a great many people to whom it has not yet become familiar. They find it surprising that the result of a great number of chances may be far more certain than the result of a few. Of course, absolute certainty of the kind given by the cause and effect relation is never attained in this manner, but something effectively just as good does come out of it. As the number of chances becomes larger and larger, the effects of each single event become less and less important, and they tend to cancel out. The probability that they will all go one way becomes quite negligible, so that something approximating with great accuracy towards the average is the final, practically inevitable consequence. So a bit of a lesson in probability there. The classical instance is given by the molecules of a gas. We know a certain amount about the nature of these molecules, and indeed it might be possible, at any rate in some of the simpler cases, to work out in detail what happens when two of them collide together, though I cannot call to mind any case where this has actually been done. To do it would be in accordance with the old cause and effect physics, but in fact it would not be very useful. This is because the number of molecules is so vast, and their collisions so frequent, that the effect of a single collision is of no interest, but only the average effect of all the collisions. So that sentence there about the number of molecules and the sheer number of their collisions, that to me is people, right? I don't know if I'm jumping ahead and he's eventually going to start saying this is the same in the world of humans, but I'm guessing that's where he's going. It proves possible to know this average by a very general method, and the average can be found without even invoking many of the properties of the individual molecules, even when these properties are well known. The most general deductions are the gas laws, which describe how the pressure of the gas depends on the volume of the containing vessel and the temperature. The most famous is Boyle's law, which relates pressure to volume. Boyle's law is verified with the greatest precision and the most absolute regularity whenever it is tested. And yet it is the consequence of the wildly varying and extremely violent collisions between the molecules of the gas. As I have said, in deducing the law, it is not even necessary to use all the known properties of the molecules. Excuse me a second. For example, we know with some accuracy the distance between the two atoms of an oxygen molecule, but in fact this distance plays no part whatever in the result. In order to derive Boyle's law, all that is required is the knowledge that the molecules constitute what are technically known as conservative dynamical systems. For the rest of the gas laws, it is true that a little more detail is needed. For example, there are differences according to how many atoms there are in each molecule, but a very great deal can be known about the behavior of the gas with only the sketchiest consideration of the details of the individual molecules. Indeed, when a student first encounters the theory leading to the gas laws, it is usually called the theory of statistical mechanics. He is always surprised at the very little foundation that is required in order to establish, quite fully and logically, such an enormous superstructure. Of course, it can never be possible to get something out of nothing. That's an interesting admission, isn't it? Apart from the Big Bang, of course. There must be a basic principle, and this, as I have said, is the condition that the molecules are conservative dynamical systems. And so I've got to say here, as you might be able to see, there is some underlining and some writing in this book. That's not mine. The previous owner has actually made quite a bit of underlining as we go through. So let's hope the previous owner was underlining the good bits. I can't quite read this note underneath. It looks like it says, is man similar? What about will and aspirations? Right. So this is quite interesting. Whoever read this before is wondering about free will based on this idea that things can be predicted and therefore controlled scientifically. And I think we all know by now that that's very much at the heart of the technocratic worldview. If you can predict things, you can control them. And so he's already asking this question at the introduction chapter. What about will and aspirations? Yeah, what indeed? It'd be interesting to see if Charles Galton Darwin, getting my Galtons and my Darwins mixed up, if he goes on to talk about free will in this book later on. This name is derived from the fact that the total energy of two colliding molecules is conserved so that it stays constant during the collision, but the term itself has a far deeper significance than this, though it is one which can only be described in technical language. It would involve going rather deeply into the subject to explain it here, and I shall not attempt to do so, since I am only citing it as an analogy. But I must make the point that in this technical language, the whole property of conservative dynamical systems can be described in a single sentence. The outcome is that in statistical mechanics, unlike the older cause and effect mechanics, the most enormous superstructure can be built, with confidence and certainty, out of a foundation which might appear to be narrow, in the sense that it can be expressed in very few words. The analogy I have cited of the gas laws is the simplest example that is furnished by statistical mechanics, and it is only fair to mention that, when the subject is pursued further, it does get a good deal more complicated. Thus, much greater difficulties arise in considering how the gas can condense into a liquid or solid, but it would not be profitable to follow the analogy into these intricacies. Even in such cases, however, though the structure of the molecules must be specified a good deal more fully, the specification still remains fairly simple, and yet it can lead to the most elaborate consequences. The general principle stands that in statistical theories quite complicated results can be deduced from simple principles. Now, unfortunately, I have no idea if what he's talking about is true or not, but it sounds like he's trying to make the case that you don't need a really massive amount of data and information in order to predict very superstructures or complex systems and complex interactions of many, many molecules or human beings, which is, I think, where he's going to go with this. So the general principle being complicated results can be deduced from simple principles. Okay. The internal condition of the gas depends, as I have said, on the molecules being conservative dynamical systems, but there are also external conditions. Boyle's law relates together the pressure and volume of the gas, so that the measurement of both these quantities must come into the picture somewhere. This they do through consideration of the containing vessel, for its size determines the volume of the gas, and the pressure is measured through the force exerted on the vessel's walls. If, then, predictions are to be made of the kind yielded by the methods of statistical mechanics, it is necessary to consider both the internal and the external conditions. When I claim that we ought to be able to foresee the general character of the future history of mankind, I am thinking of this analogy. The operation of the laws of probability should tend to produce something like certainty. So he is negating free will. He's kind of painting this picture of a mechanistic universe. Things are set into motion. There's nothing you can do about it to change it. There's a certain inevitability to things. That sounds like where he's going. We may, so to speak, reasonably hope to find the Boyle's law, which controls the behavior of those very complicated molecules, the members of the human race. And from this, we should be able to predict something of man's future. It is not possible to get something out of nothing here, any more than it is in the case of gas. So the possibility depends on finding out whether there are, for humanity, any similar internal conditions which would be analogous to the condition of being a conservative dynamical system, and external conditions analogous to the containing vessel. If both these demands can be satisfied, then there is the prospect that a great deal can be foretold of the future of the human race, and this without any very close detail in the basic principles from which it is derived. Most of the present essay is devoted to discussing the various principles needed in order to make these predictions, but I will here very briefly anticipate the fuller discussions that are to follow. In the gas, the external conditions were given by the containing vessel, and the analogy here is obviously the Earth itself. From geology, we know a great deal about this. For example, we know that it has had roughly the same climate for hundreds of millions of years, so that it is nearly certain that the climate will stay the same for 1 more million years. Did he just say climate change is not real? He said the climate's been the same for hundreds of millions of years and therefore it's going to stay the same for 1 more million years. I guess he was writing this before the first meeting of the Club of Rome, the next global revolution, and that was published. I'm not sure what year that was published, but if you know, let me know. But a very curious also that he's saying he's likening the Earth to a vessel, a container. Okay? Just curious to me because I'm pretty open-minded. I'll entertain any idea. I'll entertain any sort of theory. I'm open to it all. I think it's pointless closing your mind off to things. So I've, thought about the idea of a firmament, and imagine if it turned out that we were in some sort of ant farm that was contained and there was no going or coming from this place called Earth, right? So it's just curious to me that he makes that point. One of the points that I heard made was that air pressure. You can't have air pressure without a container, right? And I've often wondered, and it's my simple mind asking this kind of question, but why doesn't the vacuum of space suck the atmosphere off the face of the Earth? So these kind of questions do make me think. And so, yeah, very curious that he's saying the containing vessel is an analogy for the Earth itself. Very, very curious that he's saying the climate doesn't change. I think we're going to have to cancel him. Charles Galton Darwin, you climate denier. The internal principle which is to be analogous to the property of being conservative dynamical systems, of course lies deeper. It must depend on the laws governing the nature and behavior of the human molecules. When I compare human beings to molecules, the reader may feel that this is a bad analogy, because, unlike a molecule, a man has free will, which makes his actions unpredictable. This is far less important than might appear at first sight, as is witnessed by the very high degree of regularity that is shown by such things as the census returns. When averaged over a whole population, these reveal a remarkable degree of regularity in most of the happenings of life. This applies not only to basic things like births and deaths, and uncontrollable things like the incidence of sickness, but also to things in which man does regard himself as an entirely free agent. To take a quite trivial example, there is considerable uniformity in the names given to newborn infants, in the sense that it can be foretold with some accuracy what fraction of them next year will receive each of the more fashionable names. I think that is probably no longer true, given the change in demographics that has occurred since the 1950s. I think certain names are probably rising in popularity and other names are decreasing in popularity. We got quite a few people popping into the chat, so good evening to you all. I will shout you all out in a moment when we get to the end of this chapter. But yeah, this idea that the names given to newborns has uniformity, that seems, well, maybe it did back at this time. Maybe it did back then. Not anymore. Thus, though the individual collisions of the human molecules may be a little less predictable than those of gas molecules, which, as I have said, do not have to be considered in detail either, the census returns show that for a large population, the results average out with great accuracy. The internal principle, then, of the human molecules is human nature itself. So what is human nature? Sir Charles, please tell us. I keep wanting to call him Francis. That's why I kept checking the cover to see Sir Charles Galton Darwin. What is human nature? Tell us about it. Here, once again, geology provides help. A study of fossils has shown that it takes roughly 1 million years of evolution to make a new species of animal. During that time, the animal is, it is true, slowly changing. But the cumulative changes are so slow that it is only at the end of that period that the animal can be regarded as sufficiently altered to be dignified by a new name. This principle may be applied to man. Also, just my kind of idea there, altered, this use of the word altered, that to me implies that someone is doing the altering. Could just be my interpretation of the word, but you would alter a dress, which implies a seamstress, right? You would alter the layout of the room, which implies a designer of some sort. So just curious that he uses that word alter there. This principle may be applied to man. For the next 1 million years, we shall be concerned with a history governed by the same human nature as we know now, with all its virtues and all its faults. There will, it is true, be small, slow changes in human nature as time goes on, but it is only at the end of 1 million years that it may be expected to have so changed that future prediction about it would become impossible. That is the reason why I have referred to 1 million years in the title of my essay. It is worth noting that it is only in very recent times indeed that the present line of argument could possibly have been developed. This is true of every part of the argument. In the first place, it is less than a century since anyone realized the compulsive force of the laws of probability, so that before that, no one could have conceived that so much could be derived from such a simple foundation. They wrote confusing sentences in the 1950s. Then again, the actual surface of the earth was very incompletely explored until even more recent times, so that something quite unforeseeable might have come out of its unknown regions. The position of the walls of the vessel could not be regarded as fully known. Again, He's talking about a vessel and he's talking about a wall. Could that be an ice wall? As to the internal condition, human nature, the same is even more true. It is only in the last 50 years that much has been known about the physiology and psychology of the human animal. The human animal. I hate that term. It makes my skin crawl when he says that. In particular, it is only since then that the principles controlling heredity in animals have begun to be understood, and it is obvious that those principles must govern the characteristics of the human race beyond all else. So until recently, there was knowledge neither of the principles nor of the data, which I am going to attempt to use in the ensuing chapters. If there were no prospect of deriving anything beyond a sort of flat average of the future of human history, it would be a dull business. But my analogy suggests that it should be possible to carry the matter a good deal further. The physicist can not only give the average state of his gas, but he can also say something about its fluctuations. That is to say, the manner and the frequency with which it is likely to depart from the average. To explain this, suppose that a sample of the molecules is periodically taken out of one corner of the vessel, say, by trapping some of them in a little box. The number of molecules in the box should be in a fixed proportion of the total number in the vessel, and it will never be far from it. But sometimes the sample will have rather too many, and at other times rather too few. Furthermore, the sample may vary in other ways. For example, it may sometimes be hotter or colder than the gas in the main vessel. These variabilities are what constitute the fluctuations of the gas, and they can actually be observed by suitably designed experiments. They can also be calculated, again, without knowing much about the individual molecules, so that it is possible to say what variations will occur and how often they are likely to recur, though it is not at all possible to predict when they will occur. In the same way, it should be possible to get some idea of the fluctuations of human history, which will lend a variety to the dead level of the average. Indeed, these fluctuations will be far more prominent in human history than are those which are observed in a gas, for the reason that, proportionately speaking, fluctuations decrease as the total number of molecules increases. Now, in the course of 1,000,000 years, there will have been a very great number of human beings, but even so, it is incomparably fewer than the number of molecules in even quite a small vessel. So the fluctuations in human history will be far more prominent than the fluctuations in a gas. Much of what will happen in the future can be read from consideration of the past, but there has on the whole been a tendency for historians, apart from their primary function of recording the past, to be interested not so much in resemblances as in differences. They have tended to emphasize the difference of structure of the civilizations of Egypt and Babylon, rather than to point out how much more alike they were than was either to the contemporary barbarism of Europe. Interesting that Europe is barbaric in this man's eyes, and Egypt and Babylon seem to be exalted above barbarism and the European barbarism. Like, again, could just be me reading it that way, but that's kind of how it seemed. One sec, I'm just going to move the mic again. Getting a crick in my neck. A distinguished exception to this has been the great work of Arnold Toynbee, who has studied what might be called the natural history of civilizations. So for anybody new joining us or who didn't check out the Rockefeller book, Arnold Toynbee is a Rockefeller-funded historian. This is an incomparably finer project than any I am competent to attempt, but it does adopt a similar line of thought, that of determining whether laws can be laid down from which the march of humanity can be foreseen. The plan, of the present work follows in a general way. The course suggested by the analogy I have been drawing from physics. Sorry, I read that really strange. Let me do that again. The plan of the present work follows, in a general way, the course suggested by the analogy I have been drawing from physics, though there will be no further reference to this source. In the next chapter, the subject is population. This is the most fundamental question of all, for if there were no human beings, there could be no human history. Then, there are 2 chapters dealing with what I have called the external conditions. One of these briefly reviews past history. Its aim is to mention only the fundamentally important things, those that one might imagine would be noticed by an historian of a million years hence. The other deals with the physical conditions that may be expected to prevail in the world. Then, there are 3 chapters dealing with what, in my analogy, I have called the internal conditions. These contain a discussion of what appear to be the chief qualities of the human animal, insofar as those qualities are likely to help his survival in the struggle for life. In the first of them, he is regarded as a wild animal, just like any other animal, and I consider the qualities which will help him from that point of view. The next chapter is concerned with the influence of his social qualities, in which he is so different from other animals. The third is devoted to settling the balance between the influences discussed in the previous 2 chapters, and in particular to the consideration of whether man is a wild or a tame animal. So you notice the loaded question there being whether he's wild or a tame animal. In both options, man's an animal. After this, there are 2 chapters dealing with matters of a slightly less fundamental character, though they are much too important to be omitted. The first examines the effect of the limitation of populations, such as that which is being experienced at the present time in many of the countries of Western Europe. The second considers the interesting, if less important, question whether man, in his perpetual striving after happiness, is at all likely to achieve it. In the final chapter, I attempt a synthesis of all these things in the form of a forecast of the history of the future. It is divided into several subsections, each of which deals with one of the main aspects of human life. I have attempted to arrange the whole essay on the plan that all the earlier chapters should lay down principles and that the final chapter should contain their applications to the actual history. In laying the principles down, however, it has been necessary to present a good deal of detail in order to explain and to illustrate them, so that, in fact, a good many of the applications will be found in the earlier chapters. I fear that this may be inconvenient in some cases, because such illustrations often have implications over a wider field than the principle immediately concerned, and thus the reader may be left with the feeling that the discussion is sometimes incomplete. In the final chapter, therefore, I have attempted to gather these threads together, as well as to fulfill my main aim of making the forecast of the general history of the future. Before developing my arguments, it may be well to warn the reader that the consequences I am forced to deduce will be found exceedingly depressing by all the political and social standards that are now current. It will not perhaps be quite true that history will be, quote, nothing but a record of the crimes and follies of humanity, but it will be much more like that than the utopias, for the most part, be it confessed, the rather depressing utopias, which have been expounded by all the idealists. If the world is inevitably to be so much more dreadful a place than current thought expects, would it not perhaps be better to forget the fact and simply go on hoping? I do not think so. If we are living in a fool's paradise, it is surely better to know the fact. But the matter goes further than this, for we certainly can do something to control the world around us, and if we can appreciate the limits of what is possible, we may have some hope of achieving our aims, whereas if our aims are outside possibility, then we are doomed to failure. Therefore, it is a practically important thing to see clearly any laws which must set absolute limits to what it is possible to do. A parallel will make this clearer. In the 18th century, the state of knowledge of mechanics was very imperfect, and many inventors devoted their time to trying to invent ways of making engines so as to provide power for machinery. There was no known limit to what could be attained, even though it had already been adumbrated that the perpetuum mobile was not possible. The principle was not understood at all exactly, and an inventor might not unreasonably at that time have felt that there was no limit at all to what he might hope to achieve in the way of inventing an engine. Almost exactly 100 years ago, the situation changed completely when the laws of thermodynamics were formulated. These laws set very precise and absolute limits on what is attainable in an engine. At that stage, the optimistic inventor, untrained in scientific principles, may have felt that the world had collapsed. What was the use of his going on in a world lost to all ideals? A world which insisted on a dreary uniformity, with no hope that mankind would rise superior to the deadening requirements of the laws of mechanics. For him it must have been a bad world. Not so for the true engineer. He now could know just what was physically possible, and could set himself a target that was actually attainable, with the sure knowledge that he might achieve something towards it. Through the recognition of these absolute limitations on what he can do, the engineer now has a better, not a worse, prospect of doing good. Can we not draw from this parallel the conclusion that if we know the limit of what is possible for humanity, through determining some kind of laws of human thermodynamics, we shall be more successful in doing good in the world, than if we recognize no limitations and so are perpetually struggling to achieve what is in fact quite impossible? I'm going to try to see what some of these laws of human thermodynamics are. Of course, they cannot be expected to have the hard outline of the laws of physical science, but still I think some of them can be given a fairly definite form. It will be, for others more skilled in biology than I can claim to be, to perfect or perhaps to correct these attempts that I shall be making. And that is the introductory chapter. And the next chapter is chapter 2, population. I'm just going to take a quick sip and review the comments. Excuse me a moment. How is everybody doing? Quite an interesting chapter, I think you would agree. A lot of he's speaking in analogies, which I find really helpful to get to grasp the points that he's making. So he's likening the human race to gas molecules in a container. The human race on Earth, he's likening it to gas molecules in a container. And he's saying that because of the sheer number of molecules, i.e. humans, you can extrapolate the average behavior of them all and then know what's going to happen in the future. But you also need to know about the limitations of the container, i.e. the Earth, that the humans are on. So a very interesting, fascinating metaphor to me that he chose that. Let's have a see how everyone's doing. ESP in the chat on Odyssey. Good evening. And we got Newsfist as well over on Rumble. Popped in as well to say hello. He's going to catch up on the replay. Fantastic. Hope you enjoy it when you catch up on it. We've got more chats in YouTube as usual, though. It's always more active over on YouTube, isn't it? Let's go back up a second. Frank Lennon was saying, truly shocking, man a wild animal. So does he realize that he is an animal then? I think this kind of class of people tend to think of themselves as the owners or the shepherds or the farmers who are charged with looking over the human flock, the human herd, so to speak. That's kind of the impression I get. They never include themselves when they're talking about human nature or the need for depopulation or the need to reduce living standards or to make sacrifices for the greater good. It never applies to them, does it? Page 17, CERN, the God particle search, colliding particles. Yeah, that's a good point as well. Smashing particles together to find the God particles in these super colliders, kind of linked and mirroring that analogy of gas molecules colliding. Plutonian Productions, good evening. Christine as well, hello. Greetings from rainy Scotland. I could do with a bit of rain right now. It's roasting here. Frank says, so he starts off calling us animals and migrates in page 20 to calling us molecules. Crikey, he's a gas man. We got CESP saying good evening too. And Timmy Bobinson, welcome. Good evening, friends. No idea what the most common name is. Yeah, well said. Frank Lennon says, human nature is the enemy of man, and that's the Club of Rome. Yeah, that's the Club of Rome report. Is that the limits to growth or the first global revolution? We came up with the idea that the common enemy of man is man himself. Timmy Bobinson says, trust Old English not to include Ebonics. That rings a bell. I'm not quite sure what Ebonics is. Something I've got to look up. Hasdak, spinning at 1,000 miles per hour? Is that your answer to why the atmosphere of Earth doesn't get sucked off into the vacuum of space? Maybe it is. Maybe that is the reason why. Frank says, to control the world around us. Yeah, he said it right there, didn't he? Timmy says, nice library, dude. Thank you very much. Tree dude, good evening. Is the human animal a sheep? ? Well, some of us are, I would say. I don't even think we're sheep. I think we're just, we're at a really profound disadvantage because the human beings are the most studied creature, I think, on the face of the earth. I think the people who run the schemes and the scams against us to continue ripping us off, to continue harming us, to continue plowing our culture into the ground, ripping it away from us, defrauding us of our rights to belong and have a community and a stable society and to live free of theft and coercion and violence. I think this group of people know human psychology inside out, upside down, back to front, A to Z. Their knowledge is impeccable, and their use of that knowledge against us is what makes people look like sheep. You got to remember that, like, the technology being deployed is, smartphones and screen technology and flicker rate, and how it induces a hypnotic trance, which gets us into an alpha brainwave state that allows messaging direct to the subconscious. Just that on its own being ubiquitous in everybody's front room and now in everybody's pockets, tablets, laptops. It's in all the pubs. It's in the high street windows of all the shops you see. It's that they know that will plant ideas so deeply in people's minds that is, and then those ideas will then drive behavior, because it's the subconscious mind that drives the lion's share of our behavior, because most of what we do is automatic. We don't beat our heart, we don't digest our food, we don't blink, we don't breathe consciously and deliberately. We don't grow our fingernails on purpose. All this stuff is automatic. And think about how when I get up in the morning, the first 25 minutes of my day are automatic. So I get up, go to this room, go to that room, do these set of behaviors. That's all subconscious, driven by subconscious. Driving a car, you could drive a car for 10 hours or it doesn't have to be 10 hours. I don't know why I said 10 hours, but you could do a long car journey and think about totally different, and never once think about driving or your surroundings, and be engaged in a discussion or a conversation or engrossed in an audio book, and get to your destination, have no memory of that journey, because your subconscious took over the physical act and behavior of driving, so that your conscious mind could, think about other things and deal with other things. So I think, to that question, Tree Dude, is the human animal a sheep? I think no. The answer is no. But we've had free will very much degraded and attacked and taken from us in many ways, due to the assault upon our physical and psychological and spiritual beings. And all these different attacks have kind of taken a really, really hidden and got in the way of our ability to exercise free will. That's what I'm trying to say. So I hope that answer made sense. Oh, Ebonics. Okay. English with an Afro street culture twist. I got it. Okay, cool. Timmy's going to migrate to Rumble for live streams. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I'm very happy for people to hang out on Rumble and Odyssey, given the ridiculous censorship over here on GulagTube. I would very much encourage people to go to Odyssey and Rumble and ditch the YouTube platform. But unfortunately, I have the most subscribers here, so I'm going to keep broadcasting for as long as they let me. And then it would be nice if there were glasses that block the light flicker. Yeah, that's a very good point. Glasses, so like the blue light glasses, but it somehow filtered that flicker rate so that you weren't hypnotized and entranced. Like you see it in a pub, if there's a screen in the pub, it doesn't matter what's on the screen. People's eyes get drawn, my eyes get drawn to it, and it bugs me. I have to like tear my eyes away to focus on the people I'm with. And so it's a really nefarious technology that's being waged against us. So bear that in mind. I think when you're assessing people, you got to bear in mind the psychological conditioning and the programming and the studying that's gone on. I have a whole it's blocked by the, let me push that down a bit. That whole shelf there is all like human experimentation, mind control, and getting into human behavior, hacking human behavior and manipulating it, right? All sorts of stuff has been written on that. And just remember our good friend Yuval Noah Harari, the human is a hackable animal. The era of free will is over, So they've been working on it a very long time. And I kind of feel like that's what Charles Galton Darwin's getting at in this book. He's sort of saying we've now got to a point in our understanding and mapping of what drives human behavior that we feel reasonably confident we can predict and say how it's all going to play out over the next million years. So what do you think? Should we do another chapter? I'll just have a sip. Yeah, let's do another chapter. We'll see how many pages it is first. See what we're signing up for. So far, so good. He is a very dry. He's not got a lot of humor. He doesn't have he's not writing in an entertaining way at all. It's kind of academic and dry, but I think clear enough, easy to follow, and I think. Yeah, we could do another chapter. We've only got about another 15 pages, so we can do another chapter. Record Deepness says, Walter Lippmann certainly did some pioneering work back in the 20s with public opinion. Right on. Yeah, and welcome, Record Deepness. Don't think I've seen you in the chat before. Walter Lippmann was all over the Fabian Freeway book that we read through, as a matter of fact, and I kept meaning to do more of a deeper dive into him and his legacy and what he was up. But his name was all over Fabian Freeway. Definitely connected with people. It reminded me of characters such as Edward Bernays, very much into propaganda, very much into manipulating public opinion and molding it, using the power of needing to belong against people. So if everyone around you is doing something, you're way more likely to do it because you have such a deep subconscious fear of being ostracized from the group, because that could have meant death back in the day before, comfortable high standards of material living that we enjoy now. If you got kicked out of the village for doing something weird, you might not survive the night, But yeah, thanks for the comment, Record Deepness. I don't think we have anything on Odyssey or Rumble, so we'll go back to the book. I'll put the shill banner up for a little bit as well. If you're enjoying this, please consider sending some fiat my way. That would be lovely. I will promise to rescue books from a variety of moldy, dank, dusty, forgotten corners of bookshelves and bookstores all over the English countryside and cityscape. That's what I like to do with all the money that comes my way. All right. So the next chapter is population. I have a feeling we're going to get a lot of overlap with Paul Ehrlich's work, although that came much later, didn't it? Population bomb. But it's interesting that they were pushing this idea of overpopulation and the problems of overpopulation in Europe back in the 50s, when they had nowhere near the kind of population levels and demographics that we now have, and nothing like the challenges that we're now facing. So it's almost like maybe not enough people bought into it back then. And so they were like, okay, we're going to have to actually show people, herd them into cities, bring in import lots of people from other places, mix them all together, and create this illusion of overpopulation that people can see when they're on their commute, stepping over bodies in the street, walking past collapsed bodies in doorways. It reinforces that idea of, being packed into like sardines into a train or a tram or a metro or a London Underground. I was there last weekend, packed like sardines. You think, oh yeah, it is overcrowded. But, you get on a plane and fly out of Manchester Airport and it's just like empty countryside as far as you can see surrounding the city. Or you get on a train and go from Bristol up the west coast to Preston, and that is just countryside, empty countryside all the way up, empty fields as far as the eye can see. There's so much empty, unused space. This idea that of overpopulation is just nonsense. But all you have to do is look out the window on a intercity coach journey, even, right? But because so many people are herded into cities and live in these cramped conditions, they buy into and believe this narrative of overpopulation. So, anyway, that's my little spiel on overpopulation. I'll take down the shield banner and we'll crack on with chapter 2. You've probably already all read the first page by now anyway. Okay. The central guiding theme that must run through all considerations of history is the question of population. And there is a difference here between future history and past history. All these elites are so obsessed with population, aren't they? They're really obsessed with population. I think they look at it as population management. They view themselves as the managerial class, and so they have they see themselves as it's their responsibility to manage the population of everybody else. Timmy Bobinson, we still have a migrant-driven UK housing shortage. Yeah, but it's artificially created, isn't it? Because there was no reason to let that happen. It was deliberately manufactured and allowed to happen, which is kind of what I was saying. I think even though there's plenty of space, there's literally plenty of space on the planet for everyone to have loads of room to live. It's artificially managed in such a way that we don't have access to it. Like the majority of England is held by private landowners, isn't it? And is cut off to the public access. We don't have access to that much of our land here in the UK. So I agree that is happening, yeah. But it's certainly being done on purpose and deliberately, in my opinion. All right. In past history, the people were there and the historian watches what they did. In future history, he has to start with the more basic question of what people will be there. The question as to which peoples survive in the world during the march of the ages is fundamental, and must override all questions as to whether future man will be better or worse than present man, or whether he will rise to heights we cannot conceive or sink to levels we should despise. The fundamental question is survival. And this must never be forgotten, but by itself it is entirely unsatisfying, because we do want to make judgments of quality about our descendants. In this chapter, then, I shall first of all deal with general questions about population, but towards its end, I shall turn to some of these interesting questions of quality. It must be insisted, however, that though these have much more appeal than has the fact of survival, they are secondary to it, because it is only the races that survive that make the history. So this is reminding me of the subtitle to Charles Darwin's Origin of the Species, which is the preservation of the favored races, isn't it? Only the races that survive that make the history. The winners write the history books. It is always necessary, and it is indeed quite surprisingly difficult, to keep in mind that the fundamental quality pertaining to man is not that he should be good or bad, wise or stupid, but merely that he should be alive and not dead. Therefore, the first thing that must be asked about future man is whether he will be alive, and will know how to keep alive, and not whether it is a good thing that he should be alive. Whether we like this fact or not, it has the advantage of providing an objective basis for the study of future history, which simplifies things a great deal because it eliminates some of the danger of our forming prejudiced judgments. There may be endless arguments as to which of the individuals, A or B, is the more estimable member of a community. Tastes differ, and agreement may never be reached, but there is a far better chance of reaching agreement on the brute question of which of the two is likely to survive, whether it is in person or through his offspring, or by creating a successful polity for his community. These are objective judgments, and so they are likely to be free, or anyhow much more nearly free, from the prejudices which none of us can help having when it is a matter of making subjective judgments about human values. The primary question then arises, what are the conditions which determine whether a man will survive or not? In the case of animals, there is a great variety in the threats that determine their survival. So it sounds to me like he's not counting humans as animals in this bit, right? What are the conditions which determine whether a man will survive or not? In the case of animals, as opposed to the case of man, there is a great variety in the threats that determine their survival. Some are attacked by beasts of prey, some by parasites, some by pestilences, while some whole races of animals have been destroyed by catastrophes, such as the submergence of land under the sea. But all, without exception, are subject to one overriding condition: the danger that they may not get enough to eat. This gives rise to yet another threat to the survival of the individual animal: the competition between the different members of the same species for limited supplies of food. Man can rise superior to most of the threats that affect the rest of the animal kingdom. He can dominate the largest and fiercest beasts of prey. He has already learnt how to control most of his parasites, and through medical science, he is even learning how to control the most deadly of all, the bacteria of disease. So planting some seeds for the germ theory model of allopathic medicine here. While if his land is drowned under the sea, he can take ship and sail away. There remains for him one condition that he still shares with the rest of the animal kingdom as a perpetual menace to his life, and this is the need of food. Just got a siren. All right. It's really not usually this noisy in my street, but I'll go back to this bit. Here again, there arises the competition for limited supplies, whether it is a competition between man and man or between nation and nation. And for humanity, this competition assumes far greater importance than it does for any of the animals, just because, unlike them, he has succeeded in overcoming so many of his other enemies. It is this competition that will determine the detail of history, in the sense that it will determine which men and which races will survive. But deeper than this, there lies the question of how the survivors are to keep alive, and the final controlling condition for this is their supply of food. It is food that in the end determines the population of the world. During the past century, many writers have discussed the question of population, and they have naturally been chiefly concerned with the conditions of the present, of the recent past, and of the immediate future. Here, however, I am not concerned with a century or two, but with 1,000,000 years, and for this it will suffice to go back to the founder of the study of population. 150 years ago, Malthus wrote his essay on population, in which he drew attention to the conflict between the law of biological increase of the human species, which is a geometrical progression, and the law of increase in the area under agriculture, which can only, roughly speaking, be an arithmetical? I'm not sure how you say that. Arithmetical progression. Man must always be outrunning his food supplies. Malthus himself and others after him tried to devise ways of escape from this threat, but it has never been really disposed of, and it has only escaped the predominating attention it deserved through the accident of the history of the 19th century. It was verified that the increase in population tended during that period to be in geometrical progression, but the development of the New World and the establishment of railways and steamships to carry its products to the Old World had the unforeseen consequence that for the best part of the century, the cultivated areas could increase at a rate greater than the population. Malthus's first principle was shown to be correct, but his second was vitiated by the quite exceptional conditions of the 19th century. This era is probably now nearing its end, and the difficulties he expounded must be faced. There are no doubt many who are not familiar with the argument of Malthus, and so it may be well to describe how it works out numerically. His first hypothesis is that there is a natural rate of increase for any species of animal. And if one thinks, for example, of a cow producing one calf every year for, say, 5 years, it seems a very reasonable hypothesis. The rate certainly varies very much from one species to another, and the increase is restrained in nature by all sorts of checks, the chief of which is shortage of food. But Malthus assumes that for any species there is a natural rate of increase which would operate in the absence of these checks. We can estimate fairly well what this rate is for humanity by the experience of the last century in these islands, for during that time the main checks on natural increase were removed through the importation of food and improved sanitation, and the population was quadrupled in the century. There have been corresponding increases in many other countries of Europe, Asia and America, but not all on quite the same scale. So I will take a cautious estimate and assume that the natural rate of increase for man is that he should double his numbers in a century. It may be mentioned that these estimates are all well below some of the values that Malthus himself quotes. Now look at the other side of the account. The present food production of the world is roughly about enough to feed the population of the world. This is almost a truism, for if there were not enough, the excess population would have to die, and if there were too much, the excess food would simply be wasted. If the natural increase of population is to be met, more food will have to be produced, and this can be done to some extent by improved farming and by bringing more land into cultivation. There is nothing unreasonable in saying that the food production of the world could be doubled or trebled, but it is rather hard to see how it could be raised more than 10 times on the present methods of agriculture. So I'm just kind of interested now, what was the world population at the time? Now, I'll be honest, I'm fairly skeptical about world population numbers as they're given to us, just because I know some of the history of globalism, population control, Malthus, population bomb, these kind of mental eugenicists and the way they look at things. I feel like it's hard to trust in the statistics that we're given. And how would you count it anyway? Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, it would be interesting to see how completely wrong he must have been, because obviously between 1953 and the present day, 2024, the population has done whatever it's done, and it is still being maintained. The food is still being produced. But yeah, as you mentioned, Frank, the focus on food and what's happening right now to the food chain, well, it's a very good time to start learning how to grow your own food. That's what I'll say to that. But it is very possible that these methods could be improved out of all knowledge, and for the present argument, I am quite ready to grant that the food production of the world could be increased 1,000 times above its present level, even though I do not believe it possible. But there is no need to stop even there, for there is the vast area of the ocean, which we hardly exploit at all at present. Well, that changed, didn't it? Here again, I do not believe that any enormous increase could come out of the intensive cultivation of the sea, but for the sake of the argument I am ready to grant it, and to take a figure beyond what anyone is likely to think possible, I will assume that the total food production of our planet might be 1,000,000 times what it is now. Now, Bring these two sets of figures together. If the population is doubled in a century, it is only 3.5 centuries before it will be 10 times its present number, and this would exhaust what I have estimated as the possibilities of the existing systems of agriculture. Keeping on at the same natural rate of increase, the population will have increased 1,000-fold in 10 centuries, and even if new agricultural methods should permit the production of 1,000 times as much food as at present, there would by then still only be just enough food to support the populations. And 1,000 years is a short period even in the span of known past history, and quite insignificant when counted on the scale of 1,000,000 years. Again, a population that has a natural rate of increase of 1,000-fold in 1,000 years will increase 1,000,000-fold in 2,000 years. And so, at the end of that 2,000 years, there would be need of the enormous quantity of food of 1,000,000 times the present amount. It is evident that no increase of food production, however fantastically imagined, could cope with the natural increase of mankind for more than a very small fraction of 1,000,000 years. The whole argument is hardly affected even if the natural rate of increase has been much overestimated. Though experience is all against it, suppose that the natural increase of mankind would double the population in 1,000 years instead of 100. The only effect would be that it would take 20,000 years instead of 2,000 for the population to multiply itself by 1,000,000, and 20,000 years is still a very short span compared to 1,000,000 years. All these figures illustrate the general principle familiar to the mathematician, which may be expressed colloquially by saying that it is quite impossible for any arithmetical progression to fight against a geometrical progression. To summarize the Malthusian doctrine, there will never be more people than there is food for. There will not be less, because man, like every other animal, tends to increase in numbers. There have been a few exceptions to the rule of man's natural increase, and a most important one, which will be examined later, is present with us now. But to a quite preponderating extent, the rule has held in the past, and there is every likelihood that it will continue to hold. The straightforward way of striking the balance is nature's method of creating an excess and then killing it off by plague or starvation. Malthus himself and other more recent writers have attempted to propose solutions which should allow us to escape from this threat, but nobody has found one which is at all convincing. It follows that in the very long run of 1,000,000 years, the general course of future history is most of the time likely to be what it has been for the most of past time, a continual pressure of population on its means of subsistence, with a margin of the population unable to survive. So we've got a couple of comments here. Let me just go back to these because these are relevant to the reading. So I want to hit them while it's still fresh in our mind. Timmy says, climate change will force humans into dense locations, for example, 15-minute cities. Climate change, in inverted commas. Love carbon movement footprint to save the planet. I think that should be low carbon. Yeah. Yellow, orange, and red zones patrolled by militia. Yeah, I can't wait for that. Sounds great. LJ says, if they get their way. Nice. I like a bit of optimism. Plutonium Productions says, future history is an oxymoron. A conspiracy so obvious it's painful. Frank Lennon says, the world population in 1953 was 2.5 billion. And we're up to like 8 billion now. So the author is low. Record Deepness says, the author is low-balling a little to say that the ocean is hardly exploited at all, even in 1953. Fishing is one of the oldest professions. Yeah, I thought that. It was a strange one. It was quite a strange comment to make. Okay. There is no escape from the fact of the finiteness of the amount of food that the earth could produce. But Malthus' first hypothesis, that there is a natural rate of increase of man, is much more likely to be questioned. It may be an oversimplification to take the rate as fixed, but it is indisputable that animals, given favourable conditions, do rapidly multiply to fill the vacant spaces of the world. The same has been true of the rather slow-breeding animal man, and it has been confirmed by the last century when for a time the threat of food shortage was removed in some countries. Indeed, this period has had the curious consequence of allowing people to forget Malthus altogether, since the increase in agriculture outstripped the human rate of increase for a time, and so drew attention away from the problem of population. Our insight into the matter has further been confused by the fact that at the present time we are threatened with a decreasing population in England, and indeed in many of the countries inhabited by the white races. This is a very important phenomenon indeed, and it seems to contradict Malthus's principles. Ooh, I'm going to put a tab there. Quite an interesting admission. I didn't realize this is the kind of place where I would like to have him explain, a source as to why he's saying that or writing it. But quite curious and interesting to me that he's saying that white people are not breeding. Certainly it's quite an important issue in the modern day as well. Certain races, certain coloured people are having more children and are more favoured by the system than other coloured people. And curious that it goes back. I didn't expect to see that in a book this old. But it's the subject of a later chapter, so we've got more on that to come. That's good. But the matter must be regarded on a worldwide basis and not just as one of Western Europe or North America. And anyone who has, for example, visited India will get a very different impression and one which is juster. Thus, not long ago, the province of Sindh was mainly desert. The ground was quite fertile, but there was no rainfall. A grand engineering undertaking, the Sukur Barrage, has spread the waters of the Indus over a very wide area and turned much of the desert into a garden. According to the universally accepted standards, this was a great benefit to the world, for it made possible the adequate feeding of a people previously on the verge of starvation. But things did not work out like that, for after a few years, the effect was only to have a large number of people on the verge of starvation instead of a small number. Oh, okay, a large number of people starved instead of a small number. This is not the place to raise the moral issue of whether the world is the better for having the Sukur Barrage or not. From the point of view of population, it has had the effect of increasing somewhat the already great importance of the contribution of India to the population of the world. I'd never heard of the Sukur Barrage before. I don't know if anyone else that is familiar to that, but that was new to me. We've got a pink waving hand as well from the mansion. I'll wave back. And Heidi says over on Rumble, anyone who says that there are too many of us is not to be trusted, regardless if they are speaking the truth or not. Yeah, that's a good heuristic to live by. And always suggest to them that they start with themselves, They never volunteer to start with themselves, do they? It must be accepted that the objective fact of survival is more fundamental than any question of the quality of the surviving life, good or bad. And this consideration gives a colour to some of the happenings of past history, which is rather different from the colour in which they have often been presented. To illustrate the point, I will take an example. We are all shocked when we read accounts of child labour in the factories of the early 19th century, and we can all agree that the conditions in many of the factories were terrible. But how did it come about that, as soon as there were factories needing labour, the children were there to undertake it? The most reasonable explanation is that, in the previous generations, most of the children simply had to die in infancy, and that it was the factories that saved the lives of the new generations. For long ages, the world had got used to a very high death rate of infants, and took it for granted that this was an inevitable law. And now suddenly it was found that the law was not inevitable, and that the infants did not have to die. It was the factories that saved all these lives. All too many, it is true, for only a few years. But still many did grow up, and since it is life and not no life that counts, the factories might claim to be benefiting the world. There you are, bring back child labour. It's a good thing, saved a lot of people. In saying this, I do not, of course, in the least want to condone the system, which sometimes exhibited a monstrous cruelty on the part of selfish employers who were enriching themselves at the expense of the unnecessary sufferings of their fellow creatures. That sounds like it might be a little bit of Fabian socialism sneaking in there. Still, in weighing the question up, there should be counted on the positive side the fact that quite a large fraction of our present population would simply not be in existence at all now if there had been no factories 100 years ago. I have already pointed out that though the availability of food is the fundamental question for mankind, there is also the important question of the competition for that food between men and between nations. It will be those who are successful in the competition who will make up the population of the future. And so it is the qualities that lead to this success which will determine the course of future history. The consideration of these qualities is therefore naturally the main theme of the present work, and they will be studied in the ensuing chapters. In the remainder of this chapter, I shall try to deal with certain arguments about population, which I suspect may be present in the minds of some of my readers. In looking at past history, they may have been accustomed to consider that one of the important things to do, as it is certainly the interesting thing to do, is to assess merits in the personalities of their histories, and they will not be content to believe that a cold counting of heads is really more important. I do not in the least want to oppose the making of judgments of this kind, and indeed I shall be making many myself. But here I want to establish the point that, just because they are judgments of the past and not the future, many of them are irrelevant to the subject. Most people are much more interested in quality than in quantity, and they may argue that there have been many cases where quality has proved itself more important than quantity. They may say that in the course of past history, a numerically small race of high quality has often been far more important than a large race of low quality. This has been true in the past, and no doubt it will often be true again. But taken by itself, the judgment accomplishes nothing. When it is said that a small race was often more important than a large one, it sometimes means that this race, in consequence of its high quality, achieved success in life in such a way as to become fruitful and multiply, so that in fact it later became a large race. Rome in its early days is a typical example. It is not important because of its smallness, for that would imply that the rival city of Veii was equally important, but because it ultimately became large. We do not especially admire each of the villages of Latium just because one of them grew into an empire, and we do in fact value the little Rome only because it became the great Rome. In the march of history, every institution has a small beginning, but it is the whole of its history and not the beginning that must count in the assessment of its value, so that in such examples as this, it is irrelevant to emphasize the smallness. There is a second, very different sense in which it may be said that there are numerically small races which are more important than large ones. For example, there is the group of a few among the Athenians of the classical period who made important contributions to knowledge and art. The number concerned was extraordinarily small, and their era was very ephemeral, but their enormous contribution to the richness of the world is indisputable. Such contributions are undoubtedly among the most important things in the world, but they are nearly irrelevant in the present context. There have been innumerable small city-states whose earlier histories were indistinguishable from that of Athens, and it is only after the event that we can discriminate Athens from them. For future history, our enthusiasm cannot be expended on all these innumerable little states. We should only be justified in doing so if we could hope thereby consciously to create something like a new Athens. A study of past history does not encourage this hope. Most of these flowerings have occurred in association with the rather sudden acquisition of wealth by a race, wealth often won by the conquest or the commercial exploitation of neighbours. But the converse has not been true, since such wealth has frequently been gained without any efflorescence of the arts or sciences. In fact, these efflorescences are what, by my analogy from physics, I have called fluctuations, representing occasional extreme departures from the average. If it is going to be hard to do anything in the way of controlling the average history of humanity, it is going a fortiori to be very much harder to control its fluctuations. To indulge in a flight of fancy, imagine that a world dictator considered that the only really important thing was to have a new school of painting as great as the Italian or Dutch schools. How should he go about creating it? To judge by past history, he would not succeed by founding learned colleges of art with elaborate provisions for competitive scholarships, but rather by creating a thoroughly turbulent world full of struggle, warfare, and injustice. In this world, here and there, cities or countries would arise which, through the ability of a few of their citizens, their Medicis or their Amsterdam merchants, attained a very unequal share of the world's wealth. By the time 2 or 3 dozen states of this kind had come into existence, there might be faint hope that in 1 or 2 of them there really would have arisen simultaneously patrons with the taste of a Lorenzo and painters with the genius of a Titian or a Rembrandt. Altogether, it does not seem likely that the world dictator would be very successful. If this is really the most important thing for the world, it does not seem likely that we can do much to bring it about. These examples from the past, where we can be wise after the event, give little help in suggesting how the qualities of the population of the future are to be judged. Survival is the essential factor in the making of history, and it must certainly have first place. But most of us want to know much more than this about the qualities of the survivors. What line should the historian take in making judgments about these qualities? It would be a terrible view that his duty is coldly and objectively to observe what happens, noting merely that such and such a population flourished at such and such an epoch, and holding that it was not for him to comment, either favourably or unfavourably, on the qualities of the population. If the future is regarded as a quite uncontrollable unfolding of events, then a cold account of it, free from all moral judgments, would be an admissible policy. The only important thing in such a view would be the purely objective question: what at some epoch the surviving population was, and what was the character of its life. Even if it had degenerated to something very much lower in the animal scale than anything we have at present. So that reminds me of the Time Machine by H.G. Wells, which I haven't read, but I did manage to watch the film, which is kind of hard to find. It's not on any of the streaming services anywhere, but it was on the plane on the flight back from holiday earlier this year, back in February. And I watched it, and the guy ends up in the future. It's a time machine film. He ends up in the future, and there's 2 distinct races which have basically, there's been this throughout the course of human, this time he goes so far into the future. I forget how far he goes into the future, but it's pretty far. And there's been this fork in the evolution of the human species. And one is this docile, simple, sheep-like version of humanity that lives above ground. And the other is this dark, predatory, evil, violent version of humanity that lives underground, which preys on and steals members of the docile, sort of peaceful humans that live above ground. And essentially, the narrative is that the underground ones farm the above ground ones and use them as food, as a food source. And so they hunt them and they farm them and they allow them to live there and they allow them to reproduce to keep the population up so they can keep picking them off. Thank you, Timmy. Yeah, the Morlocks and the Eloi. Exactly. Yeah. Time Machine. That's a H.G. Wells book. But the film's pretty good. Guy Pearce is in it. H.G. Wells. So it just popped into my head here when he's talking about if the character of human life and the human population has degenerated to something very much lower in the animal scale. Just reminding me of that. But even for the immutable past, most historians do not follow this method. They do pronounce judgments, though nothing they say can alter what actually happened, and most of us accept this very definitely as the best way to write history. If that is so for the past, how much more is it so for the future? For though our control of the future is certainly very much smaller than is claimed by the optimists, still some control does exist. To some extent, we may aspire to give a direction to the development of the world. Historians of the past have usually taken some broad idea as a guiding principle in their account of past events, and there has been a good deal of variety in these ideas. To one, it will have been the material conditions of a people that is of chief importance. To another, their political institutions. A third will be inspired by their philosophic or religious thought, and a fourth by their military exploits. Another will trace the history of a broad general idea, like the development of personal liberty, while others have, perhaps unconsciously, imbibed the tenets of some long-dead narrow political party, and have judged the events and the personalities of their historical period by that standard. Every historian must be allowed to have some guiding principle of this type as a background for his history, and I am entitled to claim this right for myself. Since I have been emphasizing the fundamental position of the question of survival, it might be considered that I ought to refrain from all intellectual and moral judgments about the future members of the human race. It is simply impossible for any human being to pursue such a course because his whole life has been colored and conditioned by the habit of forming judgments of this kind. Even if I tried to do it, it would not be possible for that reason. But, guided by the example of the historians of the past, I would not wish to do it. Though the matter of survival is fundamental, still it is permissible to show preferences between different ways of surviving. For example, some highly successful modes of life, such as that of the parasite, would not be regarded as admirable no matter what human standard they are judged by. Now, the chief natural qualities of man, which distinguish him from other animals, are that he is simultaneously an intelligent and a social animal. And both these qualities tend towards success in survival, the one for the individual, the other for his tribe. Both are qualities which are admired, at any rate, by the majority of us, some putting intelligence first, others the sense of social duty. Therefore, insofar as it is possible to look beyond the brute question of survival and to make subjective estimates of value about the future human race, I shall rate as admirable any improvement that in the course of the ages should develop in the intellect of mankind, and any improvement in his sense of devotion to his fellow man. A combination of the two qualities is best of all, but if it is necessary to select between them, I should assign first place to intelligence, if only because it is a more distinctive characteristic of the human race than the social sense, which after all man shares with many other animals. In studying past history, it is only possible for the historian to take what did happen and either approve or disapprove. In future history, the historian is not so limited. He may not only approve or disapprove, but he may also hope. I shall hope, most of all, that the surviving races of man in the long ages to come will increase still further in intellectual stature. And that is the end of chapter 2, population. And the next chapter is chapter 3, the 4 revolutions, but we're not going to get into that right now. Put the shilling banner back up. Put my bookmark back in. So the bit that, a couple of bits there that stood out to me actually. This not glorification exactly, but the placing the intellect and the primacy as the prime feature or facet of humanity that is to be sought after and praised and celebrated, right? Record Deepness says, has the intellect of mankind as such ever improved in history? I'm not totally sure what the author is trying to say here. That's a good question. My answer would be it comes down to how do you define intellect and how do you measure the improvement, you know? a lot of people, I think, would probably say, well, obviously our intellect has improved because look, we've built smartphones and the internet. But then I would be tempted to reply, yeah, but we're not building cathedrals, for example, or pyramids, or these other megalithic sites which stand the test of time and go far, far, far out into the future. You know, we're not building anything like that. So could there be an argument? Everything we're building now is throwaway. It's temporary. It's transient. It's trash. It's landfill eventually. And it's all used to further dumb down and enslave and control people. So is that a sign of intellect? We're not building these inspirational monuments which people devote their whole lives to, knowing that it will not be finished in their lifetime, in praise of God, for example, or in praise of something transcendental and beyond the 3D world, something in the spiritual realm, something greater, more glorious, more mysterious than ourselves. We're now firmly in the age of materialism, scientism, ego worship, and these kind of tenets of Satanism as it's described by Mark Passio. I've been listening to a lot of Mark Passio recently, so that's why he's on my mind. Timmy says, we are going to lose some of the tech we have due to inability to maintain. And Record Deepness says, the way I think of it is that we can keep knowledge, but we don't get smarter. Oh, that's an interesting way of looking at it. Yeah, and it depends how you view intelligence and how it's measured. I'm not an expert on, like, for example, IQ, and I know there's differences between emotional intelligence. Just because you can do like lots of mental arithmetic in your head doesn't mean, that's one measure. But then another person might have a very good way of dealing with people and have a good emotional intelligence where they can influence and help and support people emotionally. So it's a multifaceted. I think there's different types of intelligences. And but I think the one he's going for here, and he's kind of exalting, is probably something like the materialistic, scientific enlightenment worship of the intellect. That's kind of my interpretation of it. Very happy to be corrected and hear other ideas, though. But we'll go back to the head cam. I'll take a sip, and then I think we're going to wrap it up. Timmy, I'm not going to read that comment out, but it's funny. Timmy's on YouTube, by the way, if anyone wants to go and watch the chat replay. Yeah, so a good start to the book. Certainly we're getting a peek into that elite mindset of the managerial class, wanting to control. It's really coming through this desire to control, to predict, and thereby control. If you can make predictions, then you can set things. You can control outcomes. If you can accurately predict things, then you can control outcomes, right? And that's what's bleeding through the pages at me. Is this guy? It sounds like a control freak. He sounds like he wants to know exactly what's going to happen and work it out and work out that mathematical formula, and really disregard free will, disregard anything mysterious or mystical or spiritual, anything that can't be measured, quantified. It sounds like a very left-leaning type of worship and glorification of the left hemisphere intellect, of represented by measuring, quantifying, like science. It's like the science trademark: trust and believe and worship and glorify the science, and the white-coated, clipboard-wielding priests of the new religion, scientism. Yeah. So that's kind of what I'm getting from it. Interesting metaphors used. This container with the gas to as an analogy for humanity on Earth. Strange, curious to me that he picked that one. But allusions to this long-term the likening of humans to animals, and then using this framing of 1 million years in the future was so reminiscent of the H.G. Wells Time Machine film. And I got to read that story at some point. I don't even think I have a copy of that, but I think we're probably going to find that there's a similar sort of overlap. He's kind of foreshadowed it by talking about humans becoming more animal-like. But I don't like the way he talks about the human animal and really disregards all the wonderful things about humans, which make us obviously quite apart, above and beyond the realm of the animal world, I think, in a very obvious and real way. So good start to the book. And I think it's going to be a short, sharp read. We've already made good progress. So we'll probably polish this off in 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. But anyway, we're coming up on the 3-hour mark now. Thank you all for being here. We're going to broadcast again on, when are we going to broadcast again? Thursday, 7 p.m. I can't do Saturday night this week because I have another thing going on, which I will tell you about on Thursday. But I'll find another slot. Maybe we'll do Sunday, 7 p.m. instead to make up for Saturday night. On Saturday night, anybody who's interested, I'm going to be talking with the Cutting Through the Matrix book club. And for those who don't know, Cutting Through the Matrix is Alan Watt, the website of Alan Watt. And he was a Scottish musician and guitarist and composer, but he became an avid reader of books. And what he found in those books such as this one we're reading now, he decided to tell people about, and he made the website Cutting Through the Matrix, made many, many hours of audio recordings with his insights into the grand scheme and plans and script that we've been born into. And it's sort of hidden from us that it's the fact that it's a script and that it's all been planned. But as Alan Watt pointed out, you got to read the books. You got to read Carol Quigley's Tragedy and Hope, and you got to read the Wall Street trilogy by Anthony Sutton, and you got to read Charles Galton Darwin's books and H.G. Wells's books and Bertrand Russell's books, because these are all the planners and the people who wrote the explanations of what was going to come. And Alan Watt sadly died in the last few years, but his wife is continuing to perpetuate his work by uploading it to YouTube and Rumble and BitChute. And she and some other people have started a book club, and we're currently working our way through Tragedy and Hope. And so the discussion which we're doing on Saturday night is chapter 8 of Tragedy and Hope, which is all about international socialism, which if you've been hanging around on my channel for the most recent reading of Fabian Freeway, you'll know is a very interesting topic, and we learned a lot about it. So that talk, if you are interested in being there for that, listening in, maybe even participating, maybe talking with Melissa, certainly talking with myself because I will be there, sort of kicking things off. Then you got to hunt down Cutting Through the Matrix, CTTM, here on YouTube or on Rumble or on BitChute, and you will find a link to the Telegram chat. You can get in there. Really great group. Lots of interesting ideas and interpretations and resources being shared back and forth. I visit that group every single day. It's a really good place to be. So that's what I'm doing Saturday night. I thought I would give a shout out to Melissa, who's Alan's widow. She is really keeping his work alive and doing fantastic work. So it's an absolute honor and a privilege to be involved with that. All right, I think that's all we got to say. You're welcome, Heidi, over on Rumble. She says thank you, so you're welcome. And Timmy, take care. Record Deepness, take care as well. You're very welcome. Very good to see some new names and faces not faces, but names in the chat tonight. I'm going to sign off there. So take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. I'll see you on Thursday night at 7 p.m. Enjoy the heat wave if you're having one where you are. And looking forward to seeing you on the next one. God bless.